Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for another episode. My name is Sanjar Shadiev. I'm the owner of KDK Fortis Group, the AI automation agency, plus the founder of this podcast channel. And I'm very, very excited today to share with you my guest and pick his brain about some of the topics that I think is very, very beneficial for a small startup, for an entrepreneur who is leading and growing their company. And a little bit about Mark is a fractional COO, strategic operating partner, who helps professional services firms build sustainable businesses that can run either without constant founder involvement. He works with companies like law firms, architects, engineers, construction, healthcare organizations, and he literally helps them to improve their operations, clarify roles, build systems, and create structure needed for scaling. And he is a master at it. And I'm very excited for him to share some of his wisdom that he developed while working in the corporate world, also owning a company now. So Mark, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you to spend a few minutes with you in the next 30 minutes. And if you don't mind giving our viewers a little bit of background about yourself and who you are and what you do now.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Sanjar. It's great to be here. So I'm Mark Scrimenti, and I have been a fractional COO and strategic operating partner to professional services business for the last 7 years. Before that, I was in e-commerce operations and customer experience. I was in one place for about 12 years, and we sold musical instruments online. So we were in the same space as Guitar Center and Sweetwater, if you know the musical instrument space at all. The name of the company was Zounds. And we ran some other sites as well. And that's where I really cut my teeth on operations. We went from about 50 million to over 150 million in revenue across the time that I was there. So a lot of lessons learned from there that I've been applying to founder-led professional services business, typically like 5 to 50 million in revenue, law offices, creative services agencies, architecture, engineering, construction, as you said.
Yep. Can we take a step back, right? You
Sure.
just kind of quickly highlighted, right? From 50 million, I believe it was only almost like $41 million company.
Yeah,
You grew to $150 million.
that's right. That's right.
That is
So
not a
yeah,
small number. Can we maybe, I mean, obviously we'll need a whole day for that, but if you maybe kind of give high level what happened?
sure. Yeah. No, that's great. Great. A lot to talk about, as you said. So, you mentioned the $41 million. That's probably the important number to start with because the company was founder led. It was about 10 years old by the time I joined it, but it had gotten to about 50 million in revenue, but then stagnated there and then started to slide. And in 1 year, it went from 50 million to about 41 million. So that's a pretty significant slide,
Absolutely.
almost 20%. And we had some ideas why that was happening. It was around 2008, the financial crisis. So that explained some of it, but not necessarily all of it. And it certainly set off alarm bells. And, there can be typically that quiet slide that people it's easy to explain away, but it often precipitates a crisis. So if you don't respond to it right away, it can be too late. So that was something I learned being there, and we managed to turn that around. And I can tell you about that if you're interested in hearing that. I think one of the lessons I learned though was that everybody wants to grow, and typically they start with revenue. There's like, well, we
Yeah.
need more revenue.
Yeah.
And that can be a way to go, but often growth problems are just, operational problems and drag. Like before you can increase revenue, before we could increase revenue at this company, we had to build, the actual machinery of the operation to support the business. So, this is systems, processes, teams, roles, metrics, all of that stuff. And we built the business around our strengths. That was another thing I learned. You have to shore up your weaknesses, but really you want to feed your strengths. And so we were really good at this data-driven decision making and intelligence. We had a really good talent pool to draw from. We're good at content marketing and SEO and long tail keywords. We had strong creative partnerships with our vendors. So all these iconic brands like Gibson and Fender, Shure, We had really strong working relationships with them. So that would mean we'd collaborate with them on marketing and creative, but they'd also give us special offers, special deals, sometimes exclusive deals. So we really worked those relationships. And then I think, the potential for customer service, for good customer service, it was pretty good already, but we knew it could be better. And especially because our main competitor was Guitar Center, and their customer service is notoriously bad. So we knew we could do better than that. And we hired only musicians. And then the other big thing, yeah, that was a differentiator for us. I mean, a lot of companies do, but a lot of I'm sorry, like Guitar Center often hires musicians too, but it was a
That's,
prerequisite for us.
so that I mean, it's an interesting strategy because you hiring people that believe in the industry.
Hmm.
There's a difference between hiring somebody who wants a job or good at what he does
Right.
versus when you add somebody who actually believes in something and is passionate about that industry. You're talking about productivity level probably skyrockets tremendously.
It can. I mean, it helps. There's other factors too in terms of productivity, and we can talk about that too. Just, I mean, really having clear role definition, for example, a real purpose and growth opportunities for these employees, which we did
Yeah.
create.
Hmm.
But you're right. So we had a call center. Most of the young musicians started out in the call center. They were mostly college graduates, and they were smart, and they had different talents, but they're pursuing their musical dream, whether it was the rock and roll dream or hip hop or whatever it was. And this was their day job, typically their first day job out of college. And we'd figure out, what were they good at besides music, and we'd really help them, craft a career path. And as long as you're growing, as long as your company is growing, you can give them career opportunities for growth, so that
Absolutely.
your best and brightest won't leave you. They'll be like, okay, well, I've learned what I can here. I'm going to jump and make more money somewhere else. Well, how about, we create an opportunity for you to take on more responsibility, greater challenges, and of course, your earning potential increases. But culture has a lot to do with it too. So we could get to that later too. It's like, and we wanted to make the best place to work in, in town, and that's how we would advertise it. It's the best day job for a musician in Chicago. And we had to, make that be true, because when I first started, we had, like, just the year before I started, we had 100% turnover in the call center. We hired 30 people, and we lost 31. So, like, it was not good. I mean, it was completely unsustainable. And we had to figure out, why that was, and I mean, it was partly not hiring the right people, but it was training. It was, earning opportunities, compensation. We raised compensation. That was another part of it. But we really had to, what we ended up doing was just re-engineering everything in the call center, the hiring process, progressive discipline policy, you know, core metrics, the way we measure people's performance, the way we rewarded them, their compensation, we looked at systems, we looked at processes, and we really built a different environment for them, that not only facilitated better performance, but made it a better place to work.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Going from 41 million to 150 million does not happen by accident, right? A lot of people think that if I'm $100 million company and if I wanna grow to $200 million company, just hire more salespeople, which is not necessarily true.
right, no,
Not
no,
the case. Yeah.
no. I mean, well, first of all, there's an operational component to sales as well. If they don't have a strong structure, like a
Yeah.
RevOps engineering structure, that's not going to help. They'll just be flailing. And if they're successful, then you may not have an operation that can keep up with the demand they're providing, and then you start churning clients.
That's right.
If you can't support them, or the quality suffers, and ultimately you lose clients, you lose revenue, you may lose
Salespeople.
employees, yeah, you
Yeah,
may lose salespeople,
because 'cause they're
the
not
whole
making
thing.
money. Yeah.
Right.
Can I ask you a question about the bottleneck, right? You described the founder dependency as one of the biggest bottlenecks in the professional services firms. Can you walk us through like what actually looks like on the ground and why so many founders get stuck there?
Yeah. Well, on the ground, it doesn't usually look like a crisis. Things may be going okay. Right. It's things are progressing, as but you'll hear things like, well, I've had to come back more than I wanted to, and do certain either tasks that they had intended to give up, like creative services people who are doing creative direction, the CEO of this company that's, 30 years old and, does, I don't know, $5 to $10 million in revenue. They're doing creative direction, which they're good at. And that's kind of the point, but they can't stay in that role, or the company's not going to grow. All the key decisions keep coming back to them. It's like, uh, nobody's going to make it. Everyone's afraid to make a decision without running it past the founder first, because they have the own judgment, and it's not okay to make a mistake. And that's more of a cultural thing as well. If you create a culture where people are afraid to make decisions because they haven't really been enabled or empowered to make these decisions, it ends up being self-reinforcing. The founder is still the best at all these things. They can solve problems faster and better than anybody else in the room, including the people that they're trying to develop. But every time they come to the rescue of their team, they solve an immediate problem, but creates this ongoing dependency that is just a vicious cycle to break.
Yeah, nonstop. It's absolutely vicious cycle. I can only see that. Oh my gosh. What about as a fractional COO? I know that. What are the first things you typically fix when you step into a business, and why?
Yeah. Well, before I look at the org chart, I'll really just, I'll meet the CEO. I'll meet the team. I'll ask a lot of questions. I'll look at the org chart, see, how the company is structured. I will sit in on weekly meetings, team meetings, just to see how people are interacting. I'll look at their production systems, if they're using, project management tool where to track all the work. I'll look at how that's structured, and how people are interacting, how people are using it. And then, first I will really, once I get a feel for what's going on there, then we'll set up a weekly meeting cadence for the leadership team. So if they may be having a meeting already, but the meeting needs to have a certain structure to it. A real clear agenda where you're reviewing performance metrics. Now, if you don't have performance metrics, or if that's one of the things I'll look at is like, what are you using to measure performance? And that's a whole thing in itself. I mean, people sometimes have way too many metrics that they can't keep track of, and therefore they don't really can't keep track of anything, or they're not measuring the right things, or they're measuring things, or people are responsible for measuring, for performance metrics that they can't completely control, or they're lagging metrics when they need leading metrics, you know, and that should be tiered. The top level, you just kind of want like 5 metrics that you're following on a regular
So
basis.
you seeing that it's quite often as a COO, fractional COO, you see that too many leaders or too many owners have too much data to review versus just simplifying to the 4 or 5 key data points
Yeah,
that they should be looking at.
yeah. It's often like one or the other. Either they're not really looking at the right metrics, or metrics at all, or they're looking at them haphazardly, randomly, not regularly, and just kind of to check, but not really to do anything about them. Or they have a lot of metrics, that they're tracking, and they look at all of them, but they're kind of paralyzed because, okay, well, it's just too many to keep track of. So, you need it tiered, level 3, level 2, level 1. And the further down you go, level 1 being, ground level, frontline employees, they need to be more leading metrics. Like, we want to do, let's say, 52 whatevers per year. Well, that means you need to do, one per week to make it simple.
Interesting.
And then as you get up, they become more instrumental towards revenue, driving revenue at the top. It's like, okay, how are we doing? It's it's profitability, profit margin. It might be, I mean, it depends on the business, what you're looking at, but you want to, you know, a select, manageable, and actionable set of metrics that you're looking at every level. And so, anyway, and that's kind of, getting off on a tangent about metrics, but that is really important. That goals to, like, where do you want to go? This is something that I do with, as a fractional CEO with a company. After we've gotten this weekly cadence up and running, we'll talk about, where do you want to go, and long term, like, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, and then what's your important bets for this year? What are you betting on this year that's going to get you to where you want to be in 5 or 10 years? And what do those look like? And we'll define them as objectives and key results. So like here's usually a qualitative objective, and then the key results will be numeric, something that you can actually count. Like, yes, we did that, we did that, we did that. And presumably, if you define the objective and key result the right way, you check off all these boxes, you will have accomplished that goal. And sometimes you have to tweak it as you go, and you need milestones along the way. And you typically need your own process, like a dedicated process. This is because this is all working on the business stuff
Yeah,
versus working
absolutely.
in the business.
Hmm.
And there's another thing with the founder bottleneck. Everyone's so occupied with the everyday production, running the business, that they don't have any time or bandwidth to work on the business. And you can't scale that way. You need to scale, you need to start standardizing things and taking information, extracting information from the founder's head and getting it, documented, getting it delegated, getting it owned by someone else who can really see it through to completion. That's a process, and that's where the founder gains confidence over time, such that they can trust their team. Everything is out there. Instead of being inside the founder's head, it's now like on a strategic roadmap that you can read, one page that everybody can see and hold and maybe even memorize. And that's their marching papers. That's their North Star, their decision making filter. So they can start making decisions independently of the founder, which is where you want to go. And after that, we look at culture, and I could talk about that as well.
What is one of the things that most founders are doing right now that is quietly killing their ability to scale?
Yeah.
What they should do instead?
Well, I think they have to. It's gonna typically it's gonna take more time. If they want to get out of that vicious cycle of, a couple of vicious cycles here. One is working in the business because they're so busy all the time. They're overwhelmed that they can't get out of it to work on the business. That's one thing. And the other thing is reinforcing the dependency by answering all the key questions, not allowing somebody to fail or make mistakes, not giving people permission or authority to make decisions, not giving them enough autonomy to control how they do the work versus what they accomplish. So that the micromanaging instinct can be part of it. It's like, well, that's not how I do things. It's like, well, it doesn't matter as long as it gets done and it gets done sufficiently to a standard. And that's the thing, is that, right now, like in the beginning, the founder is the standard. The founder is like pretty much they're the strategy, they're the standard, they're the value prop themselves, because they started by doing everything. But you need to get like a written standard. And if it's in law, for example, it might be, and this is where the judgment starts to transfer over. It's like, it might be like you look at the same case or a brief, and one person writes it and the other person writes it, and you compare diffs. Like you look at it like, how are they different? Okay, and then you talk about the differences, and you come up maybe with a principle or a rule, like, this is how I think about this particular issue. So when it arises, this is what I like to see. And all that kind of stuff takes time. That's like, it's coaching, it's modeling, it's mentoring. And I'm thinking in a legal context here, but in any context, how do you get that how do you get that knowledge and that judgment to transfer to somebody else? And
Yeah.
it doesn't happen on its own. And
Mhm.
so, what I often say is that it's going to take more work up front than not. It's going to get harder before it gets easier, because still, even if you want to document processes, I mean, a lot of times, team members can document processes, but there's some things that only the founder knows, or that the founder knows best. The team will try and document a process, and then the founder will look at it and say, well, that's not how it's done, or that's not how it should be done. And then they end up doing the work. It's like, at some point that work needs to be done, and it needs to be done to a certain standard. But once it's done, then the founder can kind of step back a little bit, and it's usually one process at a time.
That
Or
makes
in law, it might be one practice area at a time if there's multiple practice areas.
Makes
This is
sense.
how, yeah,
Yeah, I like what you said about it's gonna get harder before it gets easier because the hardest part is finding the time how to train the individual. Be patient that that's not gonna be perfect until it
right,
gets to your standard, right? Maybe not to 100%, but like John Maxwell said, if somebody can do it 70% as good as you are, delegate it.
right, right.
Delegate. Yeah.
Yeah,
We're living an era right now where a two-letter word, right? AI is becoming kind of the necessity, not just a luxury anymore. It is reshaping a lot of small businesses tremendously. Literally, you have the ability, a one-person company, to compete with a mid-sized business
hmm,
because you have a lot of agentic AI agents that doing the work that 10, 15 people can do, right? How are you seeing AI changing the framework in your business, other people's businesses, and where do you see it's gonna go in the next
yeah,
to 10 years?
yeah. Well, of course, I use it every day, and I'm using Claude Cowork, and my clients are using it every day, and increasingly they're using it more effectively. I'm deliberate about it. You try and be cautious about it, just figuring out where the value is and where the risk might be. Clearly helping capture decisions that only live in the founder's head. So, extracting knowledge and codifying it and standardizing is one way to do it. Turning things into documented processes, passes of SOPs, for example, standard operating procedures, surfacing patterns in business data might be one way to do it. Anything that cuts into the 40% of time that most people spend figuring out what to do next. So really as an overlay or an interface over their production systems, to help them kind of move more efficiently from one system to another in terms of their daily workflow.
Hmm.
That's there's a lot of value in that. I'm just in creating efficiencies that way. We're doing a lot of automation on operational processes. In law offices, for example, it's very procedural to begin with, and there's a lot of templated and boilerplated content. So it's very easy to take that and plug in some variables, and you know a lot of that can be automated. A lot of that stuff AI does really well. What it doesn't do yet, like judgment calls, strategy and creative, high level strategy and creative. I want a talented, human being to look at. Anything, AI gets you to mediocre pretty fast, on the generative AI side, but for it to be really effective, you got to work with it. You got to, there's a human in the loop, and you have to keep, talking with it and
Yeah,
building agents that are, with clear instructions and system prompts, and building, a structure underneath to support it, like a database structure or a folder structure if you're pulling from folders. I think what I'm seeing primarily. It's also not going to work like with you know, relationship stuff, human relationship stuff. That's not what it's there for. But, people decisions, culture calls, that's more still in the realm of human beings. But what it does, I think, is really augments, productivity. It augments what a person can do. And it definitely, there's a lot of lower level tasks that AI can handle really well, very effectively and more efficiently than human beings. So what I see more of is, the 5-person law firm that does 10 or $20 million in business per year versus like a 30 for law firm or 10-person law firm. Like just fewer people doing more with less.
absolutely. Scaling,
Yeah,
yeah, your efforts. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time. It's been incredibly insightful to learn about the scalability and where the business can actually spend more time to understand how to work on the business, not just in the business all the time, right? And I'll make sure people can get in touch with you in this episode's description. Appreciate
thank you.
you. Bye bye.
Likewise.